Hi there, welcome to Data Science Raw TV with me, Gary Short. This is episode 3, the one about schools. So, in this week's episode, what I want to do is I want to have a look at a bit of a brouhaha that's boiled up here in Scotland over the last couple of weeks. So, what happened was, if we have a look at this gentleman here, the Secretary for the Education Secretary for Scotland, John Swinney, on the 14th of June, he announced his plan for getting school pupils back to school in Scotland on August the 11th. And what he said was schools would go back, they would be restricted by social distancing rules, some pupils would be in some days and other people's other days, and in the meantime they'd continue to be schooled at home. He called this a blended model between school and home. He also said this blended model would last probably well into the next academic year, and in fact, next year, 2021 exam diet might actually have to be cancelled as well, just as this year's was. Now, as you can imagine, parents weren't super happy about that. They said, well, this is a chaotic system, it's a nonsense, especially as the economy starts to open up and we start to get back to work. How are parents going to be able to go back to work when the children are only in school one day a week? So within about a couple of days, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister in Scotland, is starting to roll back on that claim, and she said that actually what she would be trying to do is to get 100% face-to-face teaching as soon as possible, and that was on the 16th of June. Come the 23rd of June, the Scottish Government announced a full-time return to schooling as of August the 11th, with 100% of the children in school 100% of the time, no social distancing, and pretty much back to normal as of August the 11th. What happened then was one of the trade union leaders said, actually, the government created this group on education to advise them how safely to bring school pupils back into school on August the 11th. And he said that this group had been completely ignored. This new policy wasn't agreed by that group and they didn't know anything about it until the announcement was made. No, the First Minister says, this is not a political announcement. Actually, it's the progress against the virus which has allowed the Scottish Government in order to make this change in policy. It's not political at all. It's backed up by the numbers. It's because we've been doing so well. So what I want to do in this episode is kind of look at, well, who's right? Is it the unions on the one hand and the First Minister's political opponents who are saying this is a purely political move because of the large backlash against the first policy? Or is the First Minister right when she says, no, the Scottish Government have worked really hard in controlling coronavirus, and so because of that hard work, they are able to make a radical change in policy and have all of the children back all of the time in August? So let's have a look. Before we have a look, we have to form a hypothesis. I like to do this because if you're and you should too if you're following along at home, if you're a Bayesian statistician or data scientist and you follow the teachings of Bayes, then you know you have to kind of form an opinion on what that prior probability of the event is before you look at the evidence. Even if you're a frequentist statistician or data scientist, it's always good to do that anyway, because what it does is it brings to the fore any biases that you will have, and it helps you to identify confirmation bias when you're looking at the evidence. So, what is my hypothesis on this particular situation? So my hypothesis is this. Coronavirus kind of hit the UK or became a thing that we had to go into lockdown for towards the end of March. We're now towards the end of June, so it's been around affecting us heavily for 90 days now. The number of days between the 14th of June when Plan A was announced and the 23rd of June when Plan B was announced is only 9 days. Now my view is if you take any 9-day window in a 90-day event, there can't possibly be enough of a trend in that window in order to justify such a radical change in policy. So my hypothesis before we look at the evidence is that the unions are correct and this is a political announcement and not really justified by the numbers. Now that said, And having identified that bias, let's go ahead and have a look at some of the numbers. Now, unfortunately for us, although the First Minister said it was due to the work that they had done and the success they'd had in driving down the coronavirus that enabled the change in policy, she didn't actually define what that was. She didn't actually tell us what numbers they were. So we're kind of in the dark a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of the numbers that the Scottish Government publish. So first of all, we're going to look at ICU patients. The source is up here if you want to follow along at home. Now, what these numbers tell us is the ICU is the intensive care unit. Actually, it includes high dependency units as well. And what it is on a daily basis, it's the number of suspected cases and the number of confirmed cases occupying a bed in an ICU or a high dependency unit. So have a look at this. What we'll do is we'll just hide these two columns, which is the suspected and the confirmed. What we'll do is we'll just work with the total, because that's what we're really interested in. This tells us how many beds in ICU and high dependency are taken up by people who either have or suspected to have coronavirus. So let's select that data. We'll go in here. We'll grab next column chart. Pull that over here, stretch it out a little bit so we can have a look at it. Now, that is kind of noisy a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll just grab that data, add a nice trend line to it to make it easier for us to have a look at. So we'll have a 7-day rolling average. And we'll just make that a little bit more visible. We'll paint it red. We'll make it a bit wider. And we'll have a solid line. Now, that should help us to have a look. Okay, so as we suspect, once the lockdown started to take a hold, the number of beds taken decreased, and it's come down fairly rapidly, and now towards the end it's kind of stable. We're kind of in this kind of long tail out to the right. Now the period that we're interested in is the period between the 14th of June and the 23rd of June when the two policies were announced. So just by eyeball here, if we have a look at the 14th of June, and then we have a look at the 23rd of June here, we can see that, according to the trend line, looks fairly flat. Certainly by eyeball, it's flat. Certainly, there isn't a radical change in the trend there that would justify such a big turnaround in policy. So I think we can look at ICU and we can discount the ICU patient numbers from the First Minister's numbers that she said that she'd looked at. Next, let's have a look at the daily positive tests. Now, this actually is exactly what it says on the tin. It's the number of tests which have come back positive for COVID-19 on a daily basis. So again, let's have a quick look at that, see what that tells us. So we'll quickly bring in a bar chart, stretch it out so that we can have a look. Again, what we'll do is we'll add our trend line. We'll make it a 7-day average again. Then format this so it's easier to see. Again, we'll make it red. We'll make it 3-point. We'll make it solid line. Okay. So having a look at that, actually we can see it kind of follows the same pattern, a rapid decrease as the lockdown bites, and then kind of flattening off towards the middle of June. So again, if we have a look at the 14th and the 23rd, we can see it's kind of flat. Again, definitely not the radical change in the numbers that we would expect to see to justify such a rapid change in policy, or such a big change in policy. So not necessarily the daily positive tests. Let's have a look then at fatalities. Now, fatalities is a number that is published, again, daily basis. The source is up here, and it is just a cumulative total here of the number of people who have sadly passed away from COVID-19. What I've done is I've added this column here, which is daily change, which just takes today's number and subtracts yesterday's number from it to get a daily change. So if we just hide the actual cumulative total, because that doesn't really help us very much, and we chart the daily change and see what that looks like. So if we bring that in, Again, stretch that out so we can have a look at it. Again, it's fairly noisy, so let's add a trend line. Again, we'll go for 7 days. Again, make it nice and bright for us to see. So red, 3-point, solid line. Oops, solid line. There we go. Again, now we're seeing a fairly common pattern. There's quite a rapid decline and then flattening out towards the end. Now, just by eyeball here, there is a slight, possibly a very slight downward trend here, just by eyeball, but it's either flat to very slightly downward trend between the 14th and the 23rd. But again, not the obvious and high change that would justify such a radical change in policy. So if it's not the fatalities, maybe it's the R number itself. Now, the Scottish Government post from time to time what the R number is, and here's the source if you want to follow along at home. But if you look at the date, it's fairly sporadic when they actually post the R number. So sometimes they calculate it, and the next time they calculate the number, there can be as few as 6 days between the two numbers coming out, and sometimes it can be as much as 14 days between the two numbers coming out. I guess it depends if it's changed or not. I guess maybe there's no point in posting it if it hasn't really changed, but you can see that there are a couple of times where things are very similar. So what I've done when the government posts that number, what they do is they post a high value and a low value. And all I've done is taken the median value between the two and posted that here. Now, as you can see, there was an R value calculated and posted on the 4th of June. And then on the 14th of June, Plan A came out. And then on the 17th of June, they posted the number again, which hadn't changed. And then on the 23rd of June, Plan B came out. So there's certainly not a rapid decline in the R number that would justify the change in policy. So what's the last thing we can look at? The last thing that we can look at is actually, is it social distancing? Well, the Westminster government got advice from a scientific group that said under certain circumstances it was safe to reduce the social distance from 2 meters to 1 meter. Now, the First Minister at the time, she decided that whatever form that advice took, it didn't satisfy her, didn't tell her everything that she wanted to know about whether or not it was safe, and so she commissioned her own report into whether reducing social distancing was safe. Now, that report isn't due to publish, that group isn't due to report back to her until the 2nd of July. So as we stand today, and as we stood on the 23rd of June when the second policy was announced, there was evidence that the UK government, the Westminster government got, which did suggest it was safe. The First Minister, being the First Minister of a devolved Parliament, also has access to that information. So she was aware of that information, but didn't have her further and better information that she had commissioned for herself. And so it's unlikely that any change in the social distancing advice actually weighed on her decision to change the schools policy, because she had already decided that the advice she had wasn't good enough. She'd asked for some more. It hasn't reported yet. And yet this policy change came out anyway. So I think it's fairly safe to say that advice on social distancing didn't play any part in that policy change. So let's look at our conclusion then. So having looked at the ICU patient numbers, having looked at the daily positive tests, having looked at number of fatalities, the R number, and social distancing, we can't really see where this radical change in these numbers between the 14th of June and the 23rd of June actually exists. So because of that, I think we have to conclude that the decision to return Scottish pupils to full-time education on August the 11th was a political decision and not one grounded in science which the numbers support. And having made that conclusion, that's really the end. So hit like or subscribe if you want to catch more of these applied data science videos. And until the next time, goodbye.